The dealership showroom gleamed with luxury, shining chrome, spotless glass, and the smell of new leather floating through the air. Salesmen in tailored suits strutted between cars, their laughter echoing like arrogance on repeat. They weren't just selling vehicles. They were selling status, and if you didn't look the part, they didn't see you. Then, just as the automatic doors slid open, a quiet figure stepped in. No suit, no watch, no expensive shoes. Just a man in a faded gray hoodie, jeans, and a gentle smile. It was Jonathan Roumie, though no one recognized him. To them, he looked like just another broke dreamer walking into a world he couldn't afford. "Excuse me," Jonathan said softly, approaching the front desk. "I'd like to see that car." He pointed toward a sleek black convertible gleaming under the lights. The manager, a sharp man with slicked back hair and a loud voice, raised an eyebrow. "That one?" he said, laughing. "Sir, that's not just a car. That's a statement." The staff around him chuckled. One whispered, "Probably wants a selfie, not a test drive." Jonathan smiled faintly. "No, I'm actually interested in buying." The laughter grew louder. "Buying?" the manager repeated mockingly. "Buddy, you know how much that costs?" Jonathan simply nodded. "Yes, I do." The manager leaned on the counter, smirking. "Well, let's save each other some time. We don't do window shopping here." The other staff joined in, giggling, exchanging glances, shaking their heads. Jonathan didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at them, calm, patient, and almost sad. And that silence, it made some of them uneasy, because something about him didn't feel like a man to laugh at. It felt like a man to remember, but the manager didn't notice. He leaned closer and said, "Sir, please leave before you embarrass yourself further. These cars aren't for you." The room went quiet for a second, and in that moment Jonathan simply said, "All right then. I'll come back later, maybe as the owner." Everyone laughed again, not realizing how true those words would soon become. Jonathan stepped out of the dealership, the laughter still echoing faintly behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Outside, the morning sunlight hit the row of cars gleaming in perfect formation, each one a symbol of luxury, pride, and for some, ego. He took a slow breath, ran his hand over one of the cars, and whispered almost to himself, "Beautiful machines, but they lose their shine when hearts do." Inside, the sales floor was buzzing again. Manager Rick Dalton, a man who loved attention more than honesty, strutted across the room bragging about his victory. "Did you see that guy?" He laughed. Probably thought he could trade his sneakers for a down payment. The younger staff laughed with him, not because it was funny, but because they feared being next on his list if they didn't. Rick prided himself on control. He believed fear earned respect and that a loud voice was the same as authority. His motto was simple: if they don't look rich, they're not worth my time. A few feet away, sitting quietly at her desk, was Lydia, the receptionist. She hadn't laughed. She'd seen something in that man's eyes, peace, confidence, kindness, the kind you couldn't fake. And now, she couldn't shake a strange feeling that something important had just happened, and none of them realized it. A few hours later, the dealership buzzed again as more customers came in. People browsed, asked questions, admired cars, and signed deals. Rick was in his element, flashing smiles, closing sales, and throwing glances at the mirror every time he walked by. Then, one of the junior salesmen, Eddie, walked over holding his phone. Boss, you might want to see this." Rick glanced at the screen. It showed a video, a short clip recorded by someone in the lobby earlier that morning. In it, Jonathan could be seen standing calmly as Rick mocked him. The comment section was already filling up with words like, "Why are people so cruel?" Wait, is that Jonathan Roumie from The Chosen? Wow, the humility of this man is unreal, Rick frowned. "Jonathan who?" Eddie replied, "He's an actor. Plays Jesus in that hit show. Massive following. Millions of fans." Rick froze for half a second and then shrugged. "Yeah, so what? Actors pretend to be rich all the time." But deep down, he felt a flicker of discomfort. Meanwhile, Jonathan had gone to a quiet cafe nearby. He sat alone sipping coffee as a few people came up to greet him politely. He smiled, signed autographs, and thanked them kindly. He didn't mention the dealership. He didn't complain. But something about that morning stuck with him, not because of the insult, but because of the attitude behind it, the arrogance, the judgment, the way kindness had vanished the moment someone seemed unimportant. He thought about Lydia, the only one who hadn't laughed, and that's when he decided he wasn't done with that dealership yet. Back at Silverline Motors, Rick was celebrating another sale when the phone rang. Lydia answered. "Good afternoon, Silverline Motors. How can I help you?" A calm voice replied, "Yes, this is Jonathan Roumie. I'd like to schedule a meeting with your owner." Lydia's eyes widened slightly. "Of course, sir. May I know what it's regarding?" "Investment," Jonathan said simply. "I'm looking to acquire a dealership group, and I'm told this location is part of one." Lydia's hand trembled slightly as she wrote down the note. When she hung up, she glanced nervously at Rick. "Sir, I just got a call from someone named Jonathan Roumie. He wants to meet the owner about an acquisition." Rick burst out laughing. "Oh, he's not giving up, huh? Still pretending? Maybe he wants to buy us now." The other salesmen laughed again, but this time their laughter was forced. Something about the name Roumie was beginning to sound familiar. Lydia didn't laugh. She looked out through the glass doors and at the same spot where Jonathan had stood hours ago, and whispered quietly, "Maybe he's not pretending." Outside, the sky was starting to turn gold. A quiet wind brushed through the line of cars, making them shimmer under the fading sunlight. Inside, Rick leaned back in his chair, completely unaware that by this time tomorrow, his entire world was about to change. The next morning, the dealership buzzed louder than usual. Rick strutted in wearing a new suit, sipping his designer coffee, proud of another day to prove his importance. He didn't know that today would rewrite his story and end his rule of arrogance. The receptionist, Lydia, was already at her desk. She kept glancing toward the glass doors, waiting. Every time the wind moved the reflection, her heart skipped. Rick noticed. "Expecting someone?" he teased. She hesitated. "Maybe." Before she could answer, the glass door slid open. In stepped the same man, calm, quiet, with the same soft eyes as before. Jonathan Roumie. The staff looked up. Whispering began instantly. "That's him again. Why'd he come back?" Rick smirked. "Round two, huh? Guess he didn't learn last time." Jonathan walked to the counter, placing a folded envelope on the desk. "I'd like to see your general manager," he said calmly. Rick leaned forward with that same sarcastic grin. "And what's this? Another make-believe check?" Jonathan met his eyes, steady, patient. "Just business." Rick opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a check. He unfolded it, took one look, and started laughing. $500,000? What's this supposed to be, a prank? He waved the paper in the air for everyone to see. "Look, everyone. The man in the hoodie thinks he's buying a car with this Monopoly money." A few nervous chuckles broke out, but they didn't last long. Something about Jonathan's silence felt heavier this time. Calm, yes, but powerful. Jonathan's voice was quiet, but every word carried. "Sometimes," he said, "when you laugh at someone, you don't realize you're laughing at yourself." Rick's smirk faltered for half a second. Then he forced a laugh. "Oh, please, save your philosophy for church. This is a business." He walked over to the trash bin, dropped the check in, and, with a flick of his lighter, set it on fire. The thin flame curled around the paper, turning it black as smoke rose into the air. Every head in the room turned. The staff froze. Lydia gasped. The smell of burning paper filled the air, mixing with silence and regret. Jonathan just watched, not angry, not shocked, just disappointed. Rick dusted his hands dramatically. "There. That's what we do with fakes around here." No one moved. The laughter that once filled the showroom was gone. Only the hum of the air conditioner and the slow crackle of ash breaking the silence. Jonathan stepped forward slightly. His voice was low but strong, the kind that didn't need volume to command respect. "You've just burned your own chance, Mr. Dalton, but don't worry, I'm not here to buy your cars." Rick scoffed. "Good, because you couldn't afford one." Jonathan smiled faintly. "You're right. I couldn't afford your attitude." Lydia's hand covered her mouth. Eddie, the young salesman, looked between them, pale. Boss," he whispered. "Maybe we should," Rick snapped. "Quiet, Eddie. I run this place. I decide who stays, who goes, and who buys." At that exact moment, the doors opened again. A hush swept through the room as three men in suits entered, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Behind them, a black SUV idled outside. "Good morning," the man in front said, scanning the room. "We're looking for Mr. Jonathan Roumie." Rick chuckled nervously. "And who are you?" The man showed an ID badge. "Corporate Acquisitions. We represent the group that just finalized the purchase of Silverline Motors." The room went dead silent. Jonathan turned slowly, meeting the executive's eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wanted to visit before we start making changes." Rick blinked, confused. "Wait, you wanted to visit?" The executive nodded. "Mr. Roumie is our new majority partner. Effective today, he owns this dealership." The color drained from Rick's face. The staff whispered in shock. Lydia's eyes widened with relief and awe. Jonathan stepped closer, his tone calm as ever. "Yesterday I was treated like a joke. Today I'm told I own the place. Funny how quickly value changes when people think they recognize it." Rick stammered. "Sir, I didn't know." Jonathan interrupted softly. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with decency." The executives exchanged glances. One of them said, "Mr. Roumie, shall we proceed with staff evaluations?" Jonathan nodded gently. "Yes, let's begin right here." Rick's voice cracked. "Wait, please. We can talk about this." Jonathan turned slightly toward him and said the words that froze everyone in place. "I think you've talked enough." The room stood frozen in disbelief. The echo of Jonathan's last words, "I think you've talked enough," hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Every salesman, every clerk, every mechanic who'd laughed earlier now stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. Rick Dalton's confidence evaporated. The man who once strutted through the showroom now stood trembling, his tie suddenly too tight. He forced a smile. "Mr. Roumie, this has to be a misunderstanding. I didn't realize," Jonathan raised a hand gently. "You didn't need to realize who I am. You only needed to remember who you are." The silence was sharp. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. Lydia, the receptionist, stood near the counter, her heart pounding. She remembered his calm face the first time he walked in, the patience in his eyes when others mocked him. Now, standing in the same spot, he seemed larger than life, not because of power or money, but because of grace. Rick tried to regain control. "Listen, sir, it was a misunderstanding. You came in dressed like someone who couldn't afford—" Jonathan cut him off softly. "Like someone who didn't fit your idea of success." Rick stuttered. "No, I just mean—" Jonathan nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I mean." He turned to the rest of the staff. "Did anyone here think to stop him? To say maybe this wasn't right?" No one spoke. A few looked down at the floor. Eddie, the youngest salesman, swallowed hard. I wanted to, sir. But I was afraid." Jonathan's gaze softened. "Fear is what keeps good people silent. But silence in front of wrong is its own kind of mistake." He took a deep breath and turned back to Rick. "You burned a check worth $500,000, he said quietly. "But what you really burned was your reputation." Rick's voice trembled. "Please, Mr. Roumie, I can explain. Give me another chance." Jonathan looked at him, then at Lydia. "Funny," he said gently. "I remember asking for a chance too." Lydia blinked, tears forming in her eyes. She had felt powerless that day, watching him be humiliated. Now she felt seen. Rick fell to his knees, his voice cracking. "Sir, I swear I'll change. I'll treat people better. I'll do whatever you say." Jonathan studied him for a long moment, not with anger, but with quiet sadness. "Change doesn't start when you're caught," he said softly. "It starts when no one's watching." The executives shifted uncomfortably. One of them finally spoke. "Mr. Roumie, shall we proceed with disciplinary action?" Jonathan hesitated. His eyes moved over the staff, the fear, the guilt, the shame, and something inside him softened. He'd seen too much judgment in the world to add more to it now. "No," he said at last. "Not yet." Rick looked up, confused. You're forgiving me?" Jonathan shook his head gently. "I'm giving you time to forgive yourself. But you won't do it here." Rick's face fell. "You're relieved of your position effective immediately," Jonathan said calmly. "And every employee who laughed, mocked, or joined in will attend a mandatory training on customer ethics and empathy. If you pass, you stay. If not, you move on." A murmur rippled through the room. relief mixed with shame. Jonathan turned toward Lydia. "You didn't laugh," he said softly. "You looked uncomfortable, and that matters." Lydia swallowed hard. I wanted to say something, sir. I just didn't know if it was my place." He smiled kindly. "It's always your place to do what's right." He looked toward the executives. Effective immediately, Lydia is promoted to branch manager. Someone who leads with respect, not ego. Tears welled in her eyes. "Sir, thank you." "I don't know what to say." He nodded. "Say nothing. Just lead differently." Rick lowered his head. "Mr. Roumie, I really am sorry." Jonathan placed a hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. "I believe you are. But remember this, Rick. Humility isn't something you show when you're afraid. It's something you live when you're proud." Then he stepped back and turned toward the staff. "Let this day be your reminder. Everyone deserves respect. The moment you forget that, you lose more than your job. You lose your humanity." With that, Jonathan walked toward the door. Every pair of eyes followed him. Not with mockery this time, but reverence. As the doors slid open and sunlight poured in, his final words lingered in the air. "Kindness is free. But arrogance will always cost you everything." As the glass doors closed behind Jonathan, the air inside the dealership felt heavier, thick with guilt, silence, and disbelief. The same people who had laughed now stood still, faces pale, unable to process what had just happened. Lydia held her breath. Rick was still on his knees, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of the last few minutes. The executives quietly made calls to corporate, confirming the transition of ownership, and every time Jonathan's name came up, their tone shifted from confusion to awe. Outside, the golden morning light reflected off the cars, their metal shells gleaming like mirrors of truth. Jonathan stood by the entrance, watching the sunlight move across the hood of a car he once admired. He wasn't thinking about revenge or victory. He was thinking about how fast people forget that kindness is the real currency of life. Behind him, Lydia slowly stepped outside. "Mr. Roumie," she called softly. He turned, smiling faintly. "Lydia," he said, "I hope you're not nervous." "You've earned everything I said." Her voice shook a little. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you. I didn't even do anything." Jonathan's eyes softened. "You did something most people forget how to do. You stayed decent. That's rarer than you think." Inside, the staff gathered in whispers. Eddie spoke first. "Do you think he'll really keep the place?" Another salesman muttered, "He's an actor, man. Maybe this is some big PR stunt." Rick looked up from the floor, his voice hoarse. "It's no stunt. We're finished here." Just then, the deep hum of an engine broke the silence. A convoy of black SUVs rolled into the parking lot. Out stepped a group of sharply dressed executives, followed by photographers, journalists, and a few curious customers who had heard the rumor spreading online. One of the corporate directors, a tall man with silver hair and a calm presence, walked straight up to Jonathan. "Mr. Roumie, everything's official. The papers are signed and the press is waiting for your statement." Rick's face went white. He stumbled to his feet, his voice barely a whisper. "The press?" The director turned toward the crowd inside the showroom. "Everyone, listen carefully. As of this morning, Jonathan Roumie is the new majority owner of Silverline Motors and its regional branches." The announcement hit like thunder. Gasps, murmurs, phones coming out. Every employee who had mocked Jonathan earlier now stared in shock, unable to meet his eyes. Rick tried to step forward. "Sir, please, mind if I could just—" Jonathan raised a hand. "You don't need to explain again. I've already heard everything that matters." He walked back inside, each step echoing like a heartbeat through the marble floor. Customers who had gathered outside began clapping softly, not out of fame, but out of respect. They'd seen the viral video from the day before, the way he was mocked, the way he stayed calm. Jonathan stood in the center of the showroom, the same place where Rick had burned his check, and looked around slowly. The scorched bin still sat there, ashes inside. He bent down, picked up a charred piece of paper and held it between his fingers. "This," he said quietly, "is what pride looks like when it burns." No one dared speak. He turned to the corporate director. "We'll rebuild this place. Not the floors or walls, but the culture. No one who walks through that door should ever feel less than human again." Lydia stood beside him now, her posture unsure but proud. Jonathan glanced at her. "You'll help me with that, right, manager?" She smiled through tears. "I'll do my best, sir." Rick's voice broke. "Please, Mr. Roumie, if I could just have one more chance. I've got a family. I can't lose this." Jonathan looked at him for a long moment, then sighed softly. "You're not losing your job, Rick. You're losing your old self. That's the part you need to let go." Rick looked confused. "You'll stay for now," Jonathan continued. "But under Lydia's leadership, you'll learn humility by serving instead of ruling. If you can't handle that, walk away." Rick's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, sir. I don't deserve this." Jonathan nodded. "No one ever deserves grace. That's what makes it powerful." He turned back toward the press waiting outside. "I didn't buy this place to make headlines," he said. "I bought it to remind people that titles fade, money fades, but how you treat others lasts forever." The cameras flashed. Rick lowered his head. Lydia stood taller. And as Jonathan walked through the doors once more, a hush of reverence followed him, not for the celebrity, but for the man who proved that humility could still lead the room. The dealership was quieter than it had ever been. No loud laughter, no fake smiles, only the faint hum of engines and the weight of realization hanging in the air. The journalists had left. The executives were finalizing paperwork, but the real story wasn't on the news. It was happening in the hearts of those who'd stayed behind. Rick Dalton sat on the edge of his desk, eyes red, hands trembling. Just hours ago he was the king of this showroom, loud, proud, untouchable. Now every sound felt like an echo of his own arrogance. Lydia was beside him, reviewing a stack of documents Jonathan had left for her: staff restructuring, ethical standards, community programs. Her name was at the top of the memo: Branch Manager, Lydia Hart. She looked up and saw Rick staring blankly at the floor. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Rick exhaled, shaking his head. "No, and maybe that's good. I shouldn't be okay after the way I acted." Lydia hesitated. "He could have fired all of us, but he didn't." Rick gave a weak smile. "Yeah, that's what makes it worse. He showed mercy, and now I have to live up to it." He stood, buttoning his coat like a man trying to gather the pieces of his pride. "I've been running this place for years," he said. "Thought I knew everything about success. Turns out I've been bankrupt the whole time, just not in the way I thought." Meanwhile, Jonathan was standing outside near the lot speaking with the corporate team. He'd already signed the final ownership papers, but he wasn't talking about profits or sales goals. He was talking about people. "This place doesn't need a new logo," he said. "It needs new hearts. Let's invest in training, not just for sales, but for empathy. If we can sell cars, we can sell kindness too." The executives nodded, half in awe, half inspired. They'd seen business owners obsessed with numbers, but rarely one focused on integrity. Jonathan shook their hands and thanked them before turning back toward the dealership. He wanted to say goodbye properly. When he walked in, everyone stood. Not out of fear, out of respect. Rick stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Roumie, I don't know how to say this. I was cruel, arrogant, and blind. And the worst part is I wasn't even original. I learned it from others and passed it down. But I promise you, I'm done being that man." Jonathan looked at him quietly for a long time, then smiled faintly. "You know, Rick, when someone crashes a car, we don't destroy the driver. We teach them to drive better." Rick nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you, sir. I'll earn the second chance." "I hope you will," Jonathan said gently, "because forgiveness isn't freedom, it's responsibility." He turned to Lydia. "How does it feel, manager?" She laughed nervously. "Terrifying." He grinned. "Good, that means you care. Keep this place honest. Lead with humility. And when you hire new staff, don't look at their clothes. Look at their character." "I will," she promised. Jonathan began walking toward the exit, but before leaving he stopped and turned back one last time. Everyone in the room looked at him, silent, waiting. He pointed toward the burnt bin still sitting in the corner. "I'm leaving that there," he said. "Don't clean it up. Every morning when you walk past it, remember what it means." Eddie frowned. "What does it mean, sir?" Jonathan smiled softly. "It means pride burns fast, but respect, and that's what lasts." He reached for the door. Sunlight poured through the glass, framing him in a glow that made the moment almost sacred. He looked back one final time. "None of you work for me," he said. You work with me, for something bigger than money. Treat every customer as if they were me, because one day they might be." Then he stepped outside. The doors closed, but his words stayed behind like an echo of grace. Inside, Rick turned to Lydia. "You ever meet someone who makes you want to be better just by standing next to them?" She smiled, eyes wet. "Yeah, I think we all just did." The entire team stood quietly, no one moving, no one speaking. For the first time, Silverline Motors felt like more than a dealership. It felt like a place where respect had finally been restored. Outside, Jonathan walked toward his car. Not one of the flashy ones from the showroom, but a modest sedan he'd driven for years. As he opened the door, he whispered to himself, "Power changes the world when it's humble enough to serve it." Then, with a calm smile, he drove away, leaving behind a lesson that would last far longer than any luxury car ever could. The next morning, the sun rose over Silverline Motors, washing the glass panels in soft gold. But inside, something had changed. It wasn't the cars. It wasn't the decor. It was the energy. The arrogance that once filled the air was gone, replaced by quiet humility, by people who now understood the weight of a single word: respect. Lydia walked through the showroom, clipboard in hand, her step steady but gentle. Each staff member greeted her with genuine warmth, not the fake smiles they used to give Rick. Even Rick, now working as a senior advisor under her management, carried himself differently. He smiled more, listened more, and, most importantly, learned more. As Lydia passed the corner where the trash bin once burned, she stopped. The blackened metal was still there, just as Jonathan had said. A reminder, a scar left on purpose. She knelt beside it, tracing her fingers along the edge. A faint smell of ash lingered, not unpleasant anymore, but symbolic. She whispered, "Pride burns fast, but respect lasts." Behind her, Rick nodded quietly. He'd been watching. "Never thought I'd say this," he said, "but that man changed everything." Lydia smiled faintly. "He didn't change the business, Rick, he changed us." Rick exhaled deeply. "I guess that's the real difference between power and leadership." Days passed. The story spread online, from local news to viral clips shared around the world. Actor Jonathan Roumie humiliated, then buys the dealership. Millions watched, millions commented, but Jonathan himself stayed quiet. No interviews, no revenge posts, no grand speeches, just silence and service. He was seen later donating to youth automotive programs, offering mentorship to underprivileged mechanics, and creating scholarships in Lydia's name for ethical leadership in business. When asked by a reporter why he forgave the staff instead of firing them, Jonathan's answer was simple: "Because people can't learn from punishment. They learn from example. If I want the world to change, I have to start by being the kind of person I wish everyone else would be." Those words went viral again, spreading faster than the original humiliation ever had. Because in a world obsessed with revenge stories, Jonathan gave something rarer: redemption. Weeks later, Lydia received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, sealed with a small wax stamp. She opened it carefully. Inside was a short note: "Lydia, lead them with kindness. The hardest test of power is staying gentle when you have it. I'll be watching, not as your boss, but as your brother in faith." Jonathan, a folded photograph fell out. It was of the entire staff standing together under the dealership sign, smiling. On the back, Jonathan had written one final line: "A family rebuilt by respect." Lydia couldn't help but tear up. She placed the letter in her office frame beside the blackened bin, a daily reminder of what humility could do. That same evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, a customer walked in, a single mother with 2 kids. Her clothes were worn, her car barely holding together, but this time no one laughed. No one judged. They offered her water, sat her down, and treated her like the most important person in the world. Because she was. Every customer was, and somewhere in that moment, you could almost feel Jonathan's quiet smile, as if his spirit lingered in the walls, in the light, in the changed hearts he left behind. Narrator respect isn't shown when the cameras are on. It's shown when you think no one's watching. Arrogance burns quickly, but humility builds forever. Jonathan Roumie didn't just buy a dealership, he bought back its soul. And he reminded the world that the real currency of life isn't money. It's character. So remember this. The next time you're tempted to look down on someone, pause and ask yourself, what if they're the one teaching me something I can't buy? Because sometimes the richest people walk in quietly, and the loudest lessons come from the calmest hearts. Call to action: if you believe humility is real power, type respect in the comments. Tag someone who stayed kind even when the world wasn't. And tell me, would you forgive if you were in Jonathan's place? Or would you fire them all? Let's see how many hearts still believe in grace over ego